Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Labyrinth and the Library live streaming. We currently have the chat box open. I see someone asking, will a recording of this be made available? Yes, this will be available up on Crowdcast as soon as we are finished, and it will stay up here. And yes, and if you have to leave after 45 minutes, you can come back and watch the end. I see lots of people are saying that they are pleased to be here. Just give me a little signal that everything is coming through nice and clear and that you can hear me and that we are set to go. Just say, yes, let's go. So I know that we're good. And also Labyrinth will be posting this to their YouTube account at Labyrinth Books Princeton on YouTube. So yes, this will be available for those who can't be here live and in person with us today. So my name is Janie Herman, and I am the public programming librarian at Princeton Public Library. And this is a great collaboration that the library and Labyrinth, we normally do these in person. We call them Labyrinth Live at the Library, but we've decided in these times to band together and do our live streaming events together. So whether the library organizes or Labyrinth organizes, we're cross-promoting as a show of support for each other because as a library, we strongly believe in the need for a good independent bookstore in our town, and it is our great pleasure to always work with Dorothea and her team at the library. So we are good to go, I'm seeing. Great, thank you for chiming in. I am going to be turning the chat box off when I invite Julia on screen so that it's not distracting as she is discussing with us. But you can see at the bottom of the screen, there's several buttons. One is the call to action button that says Order Disappearing Earth. So this will take you to the Labyrinth site. And Labyrinth is offering a 10% discount and free shipping if you're on this Crowdcast event and you order from them. Just mention that you're on Crowdcast. If you call the store, you say, I was on the Crowdcast event. I'd like to order this, and they'll ship it to you for free with a 10% discount. And really, you know, supporting our independent bookstores is so crucial in this time, as well as supporting our libraries, I have to add. We all need to be around once this is through. And there's also at the bottom a place where you can ask a question. So feel free to type your questions in there. That won't go away, even though the chat will be off. And then you can, at the end, after we're done the interview, I'll be able to moderate and go through and see the questions that were asked. You can also see what questions other people have asked. And if you like their question and want to get it up to the top of the list in case we run out of time, upvote their question with clicking the arrow. So voting questions up is really important. Let us know what you would like to ask Julia at the end of the interview. So let me get on to introducing our event. So Julia Phillips was scheduled to appear in person at the store on April 7th as a Library Live at Labyrinth event. And of course, that wasn't able to happen. So we are so pleased that we were instead able to reschedule her to host her in this way on Crowdcast. It does not really replace being together in person, but it does allow us all to come together and connect as a community, at least virtually, and talk about our shared love for great books. So Julia Phillips is the debut author of the nationally best-selling novel, Disappearance Earth, Languages, and it was a finalist for the National Book Award. In addition, it was named one of New York Times 10 Best Book finalists for the National Book Critics Circle's John Leonard Prize and a finalist for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize. It was named a Best Book of 2019 by more than 20 publications, including the Washington Post, NPR, Kirkus, Variety, Library Journal, CBC, Book Page, among many others. Written for the New York Times, the Atlantic, Paris Review, as well as Glimmer Train, Slate, and the Moscow Time. She currently lives in Brooklyn, where we just introduced ourselves to each other over a lovely chat before here. There's actually a green room in here, which is kind of cool. So Julia is waiting. I'm going to bring her up, and then I'm going to silence our chat.
Oh, hi. Hi.
Hi, here you are. You are here.
I am. Okay, I'm crossing my fingers that my internet behaves. It's so nice to be with you and so nice to be with everybody. I was watching your chats pop up and it was so exciting.
Yes, it is very exciting. When the technology all works, it's a great thing. And we're just so happy to have you here with us tonight. And we're going to just dive right into some of the questions that I have, and then we're going to take questions from the audience, do a little bit of reading. And so first of all, I mean, obviously, the question that comes to my mind right away is, how does it feel to be a debut novelist and to have had your novel receive such acclaim from so many publications and be nominated for multiple prestigious literary awards? Basically, how has this last year of your life changed as a result of this novel? And did you expect this type of reaction?
Oh my gosh. The last year of my life has been the most exciting and dreamlike experience I could possibly imagine. I grew up always wanting to be a novelist. I dreamed of writing books, and I had worked on a manuscript before this that didn't find an agent or a publisher, and that ended up being an ultimately very educational and positive experience to go through that long process. But it made one of the biggest things I took away from that is that it's a joy for me to work on the writing, even if it doesn't find an audience. And certainly that was an attitude I tried to keep in mind as I was working on this book, which is about a kidnapping in the Russian Far East, and very much specific to this place where it's set, which is the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia and the Bering Strait, and specific to these stories of small moments in women and girls' lives. And as I was working on it for years and years, I thought, this is so resonant with my interests, and I don't know if it's going to resonate with anyone else's interests in the world. But these are things that I'm really interested in, and I am enjoying working on it. It has been such a gift and a joy and an amazement to find that other people are interested in and connecting to this story, that people have all of their own connections to this beautiful place that I love so much, that people want to really dig into the lives of these characters in the same way that I spent so many years alone doing. It's been really unexpected to me and really extraordinarily wonderful.
Yeah, and it is such, we're going to talk a little bit more about the setting, because I think that is part of there's so many beautiful parts to this novel. And I will tell you that, for me, as we were talking about beforehand, I think my initial instinct to pick up this novel was the setting. I had never seen a novel, set in this region of Russia. I've read a lot of Russian literature over the years, and have had a big interest in Russia, as I was saying. The one descriptive I see over and over again for your book is haunting. And it's definitely a book that haunts, your thoughts, both while you're reading it and then long after you're reading it. And it stays with you long after you're finished. So to me, this has to do with both the characters and the story, but it also has to do, to me, with the setting. So can you tell us why you chose the Kamchatka Peninsula and what it is about the landscape of this region that you think made it the most compelling and actual fact? I think the story works so well because of the setting.
Janie, that means so much to me. I'm really glad that that's how you came to the story, because that's how I came to the story. I came to the story setting first. I said before that I always wanted to be a novelist, and I always did. That was always my kind of greatest creative and professional goal. But I also, starting from kind of high school age, had this abiding interest in Russia. I was really interested in the Russian language, Russian literature, and history. And I studied English and Russian in college. I studied abroad in Russia, and it was something that I couldn't quite figure out how to make the two things meet. And so eventually I decided, okay, well, if I set a novel in Russia, then I can move to the country and keep on studying the language and try to continue my studies and work on my craft. So I started hunting around for a setting, and there were certain things I was dreaming of a place to move. So I thought I'd love it to be someplace beautiful. I was coming from New York City and had spent a lot of time in Moscow. So I thought I'd like to go someplace outside of a metropolitan center, or not so sort of centered around urban life. And I thought I'd like to go someplace that has some connection to the Cold War or to Russo-American relationship, because that is something that is really interesting to me. And
Mhm.
certainly as an American, it has been my entry point into Russian studies for a long time. And when I learned about Kamchatka, it was beautiful. It was enormous, an enormous region beyond just the metropolitan center, the city capital, and in which most of its population lives. It was hugely pivotal during the Cold War, but it's also so much more. It really blew me away as this potential setting for fiction. It is huge. It's a 9-hour flight from Moscow. It's kind of like if you picture the tail of Alaska swinging out, it swings into the bottom of Kamchatka. It's so far east that it's west again on the map. It is an incredibly isolated, geographically isolated place from the center of power in Russia. And it's also been very politically isolated. It was a closed military territory during so much of the 20th century. And it has only been open to visitors in the past 30 years. And it is also shockingly beautiful. It's on the Pacific Ring of Fire, so it's filled with volcanoes and geysers and hot springs and all of these extremes that where it was located in the world, the political history it was coming out of, its natural splendor, its own cultural dynamics. All of these things made it seem to me like, I don't know what story I want to write yet, but this seems to me like a place that's full of stories and a place where you could spend your whole life just learning about this one region and never get to the bottom of it. And I thought, okay, well, I want to go there. So that's how I came to Kamchatka first. Came there intending to write a book, but not knowing what it would be about. And certainly the book that I wrote, which ended up being this mystery in many ways that responds to a lot of the obsessions and interests I brought with me from the US, is really shaped by Kamchatka's isolation, Kamchatka's lack of infrastructure, that this place is a peninsula that's effectively an island. Right. And a big locked room for what I hope is a satisfying locked room mystery.
Yeah, I could go on for a long time about the setting, but let's just move on. Maybe before we get further, I think it'd be a nice time for us just to pause so people can hear the beautiful language of this book. And maybe you could just read us a little passage. Would that be?
Sure. Let's see. I can read from the beginning of the book, which is about 4 minutes. So I could read a scarier moment later in the first chapter.
Let's do the beginning of the book. Let's set the stage at the beginning.
All right, let's set the stage there. I think that's perfect. This is the paperback, by the way, which just came out. It came out the day that I was supposed to be in Princeton in person with you all, so it's nice to have it here with you now. Sophia, sandals off, was standing at the water's edge. The bay snuck up to swallow her toes, gray salt water over bright skin. "Don't go out any farther," Alyona said. The water receded. Alyona could see under her sister's feet the pebbles breaking the curves of Sophia's arches, the sweep of grit left by little waves. Sophia bent to roll up her pant legs, and her ponytail flipped over the top of her head. Her calves showed flaking streaks of blood from scratched mosquito bites. Alyona knew from the firm line of her sister's spine that Sophia was refusing to listen. "You better not," Alyona said. Sophia stood to face the water. It was calm, barely touched by ripples that made the bay look like a sheet of hammered tin. The current got stronger as it pulled into the Pacific, leaving Russia behind for open ocean, but here it was domesticated. It belonged to them. Hands propped on narrow hips, Sophia surveyed it, the width of the bay, the mountains on the horizon, the white lights of the military installation on the opposite shore. The gravel under the sisters was made of chips from bigger stones. Alyona leaned against a block the size of a hiking backpack, and a meter behind her was the crumbling cliff face of St. Nicholas Hill. Water on one side, rock wall on the other. They had walked along the coast this afternoon until they found this patch free of bottles or feathers to settle. When seagulls landed nearby, Alyona chased them away with a wave of her arm. The whole summer had been cool, drizzly, but this August afternoon was warm enough to wear short sleeves. Sophia took a step out, and her heel went under. Alyona sat up. "Soph, I said no." Her sister backed up. A gull flew over. Why do you have to be such a brat? I'm not. You are. You always are. No, Sophia said, turning around. Her tipped-up eyes, thin lips, sharp jaw, even the point of her nose annoyed Alyona. At 8 years old, Sophia still looked 6. Alyona, 3 years older, was short for her age, but Sophia was tiny all over, from waist to wrists, and sometimes acted like a kindergartner. She kept a row of stuffed animals at the foot of her bed, played pretend that she was a world-famous ballerina, couldn't fall asleep at night if she caught even one scene of a horror movie on the TV. Their mother indulged her. Being born second had given Sophia the privilege of staying a baby all her life. Gaze fixed on a spot on the cliff far above Alyona's head, Sophia lifted one foot out of the water, pointed wet toes, and raised her arms to 5th position. She tipped and caught herself. Alyona shifted her seat on the stones. Their mother always tried to get Alyona to take her sister along to classmates' apartments, but these little misdeeds were exactly why she would not. Instead, they had spent their summer vacation alone with each other. While Sophia balanced, Alyona looked along the shore. A man was picking his way over the rocks. Someone's coming, Alyona said. Her sister splashed one leg down and lifted the other. Sophia might not care who saw her act like an idiot, but Alyona, her forced companion, did. Stop, Alyona said, more loudly, heating up in her mouth. Stop! Sophia stopped. And I'll stop there too.
Okay. So yeah, we meet these two precious little girls. Oh, wait a minute now. Oops, I made you small. I didn't mean to. Hang on.
We're stopping places.
Oh, that's what, I'm sorry. Here we go. We're back.
Perfect.
We're back to split screen. Yeah, that's sorry. I have all the controls here and they still sometimes get mixed up. Okay. So yeah, you meet these little girls and you think this novel is going to be about these little girls, right? You think this is what I would say is a very unusual structure. It's linear in time. It goes through the course of a year, right? So that's good. But it's not really linear in characters or storylines as you move through the year. So the disappearance of, and I've been saying the name Alyona.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, their story sets the rest of the novel in motion and what follows, but they're the focus, but they're not the focus. So it's kind of unusual. Those that haven't read it yet, because certainly want to read this. So you go month by month and you're following and really chronicling a story narrated by different women or girls, as the case might be, who are, connected in some ways to these two little girls. Sometimes so it's like, I feel like it was like a ripple effect novel. There's this one event that has a ripple throughout the whole community. Can you tell us more about this structure, how it came to be, how you built it? Like, what was the impetus behind using that as your literary device, as your structure, however you want to call it?
Yeah, I love thinking of it as a ripple effect. When I was working on it, I often thought of it as a spiral, that we start in one place and then we spiral outward and outward and outward, and then at a certain point we come back into the center of the spiral. Like a seashell kind of is how I liked to picture it. I knew from the start of the project, when I didn't know yet any of the characters or the plot, I knew I wanted, when I was working from setting first, I knew I wanted to cast quite a wide net over that setting and have lots of characters and lots of different experiences and have as broad a focus as possible, because I was so interested in and in love with this place. And so I thought, I want to show as much of this place as I possibly can. I want to, quite literally in the text, cover a lot of territory. And that certainly shaped the structural decisions I was making as I wrote it. But as I developed the story, or as the story began to come together, before I even came into the drafting of the manuscript, I started to see that desire to cast, this wide net over a community was really exciting to me as a way to explore a kind of story that I had grown up obsessed with, that I really could love to consume. I really love, and I say love in all its, it's not a great thing to love this, I think, but I really love and am eager often. I have an appetite for stories of missing girls and women. I watch a lot of Law and Order SVU. I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts. I grew up as a little kid, reading a lot of fairy tales of princesses in peril or disappearing. That was something that was exciting and titillating to me. And after a while of consuming those, you start to wonder, what is it about these that makes, what is stimulating me about these? And what is this appetite for these stories? What is that coming from? What is that stemming from? And how is it seemingly insatiable? And I wanted to write this story about these two young girls, these sisters that we meet going missing, and the effect that has on the community around them. Because I wanted to explore in myself a missing girl story, so to speak, that was framed in a different way. That wasn't about a victim, a perpetrator, and a detective who's brilliant, but was about a community of people who are all culpable in enacting harm on each other, who all hurt each other and experience hurt, and who also, as a community, can take an active role in helping each other. That the way that the investigation of the girls is shaped and influenced is not
Cutting
about...
a little bit in and out.
Ooh.
Oops.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I hope it's working better. How's this? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll keep my fingers crossed.
Okay.
that basically that this is a story of a community effort to solve a case or to address violence in the same way that it was a community effort to make that violence happen in the first place. It's not just about one person making these bold choices. It's about a lot of people making small choices in their everyday lives that can help or hurt each other. Yeah, that became the guiding approach for why it's structured the way it is, and what was most exciting to me about the project.
Yeah, I didn't really think, it is all about all the small choices that really, all these characters together lead to this fantastic ending, which I not going to say. We actually had someone that came on the chat really early on and said, no spoilers. I've just read the first chapter.
I'm so glad. I think that's a great.
And I don't want it. So we have to be ashamed for anybody who's on here and hasn't that. So I'm going to encourage people to ask their questions. We have one really great question in there, and we are coming up to the question and answer time. So I want to ask you, so this is really, though, to me also a book that speaks to trauma and to grief in many different ways. It's like peeling back layers of trauma and layers of grief in the lives of women in Russia. The history impacts upon that of Russia. And we were talking as someone that's been to Russia myself and spent quite a bit of time there. It is a country that is so advanced in many ways, but yet it's like there's this divide there. But it is really a book of trauma and grief and how women are treated in Russia. There's still a lot of misogyny there in the lives of that, and there's an underlying thread of racism and a way some people are still longing for the ways things were when they were the USSR. Not everybody, to them that was a safer time. It was a time when their borders were closed and things were controlled. So how have readers reacted to this aspect of the book, of the trauma and the grief and the commentary on Russian life today?
I think, that's such an interesting question. And my experience of how readers have reacted is very specific because I only know the folks who come up to me and share their reactions, and I'm very glad that people don't share with me every reaction that they have to the book. Um, I think that there are folks who are processing their reactions or having different reactions that in venues that aren't shared with me, and I'm grateful for that, frankly. I think it's been interesting to me. One of the most interesting things to me since the book has come out is people saying to me, I remember someone saying, and this really stuck with me. I remember someone saying, "Oh, is the book a real reflection of how women are treated? Are women really so oppressed on Kamchatka? Is that what it's like there?" And I was really surprised at that question. That hadn't occurred to me because it was very different from what my vision was in the writing. That I don't know if these things are universal, but I certainly feel that they are part of my entire known universe as someone who was born and raised in the US. What sexism or what racism looks like in Russia sometimes looks a little bit different than how it looks in America, but racism and sexism and ethno-nationalism and colonialism and white supremacy, those are conditions that are very present in the America that I know, in which I was born and raised, and in which I live. And part of writing this book was a processing for me of those conditions, while also trying to understand specifically what they look like in this particular place where the book is set. So there's misogyny in the book, and there's sexism in the book, and those things are not at all specific to this peninsula in any way, I think. But definitely when thinking about like a general condition that is experienced certainly in our two countries and how it specifically manifests in Kamchatka, the experience of that sort of nostalgic longing for the past, or saying it was better then, it was better when, we should close our borders because it was better when it was closed. Kamchatka has a very specific experience of that, in that their borders were closed, not only to foreigners, but to even other Russians until 30 years ago. And so when people say, there used to be no crime here until outsiders came in, that is a very specific experience that they're talking about, and a very specific kind of nostalgia or sense of the past or telling of the past. It's so Kamchatkan, and yet it's fascinating to me because it's also so American in my, there are a lot of folks there who I think would be very on board for a sort of make Kamchatka great again campaign. the idea that violence can't be coming from us. It's got to be them. They are the bad guys. And so if we can just get them out, then we'll all be great again. And the division of us and them, and who gets to be us and who is assigned as them. That's a really interesting dynamic to me. And it's one that shapes the plot of the book, certainly. And one that I think I'm trying to process a lot in my writing and in my life in the US.
Yeah. And then also, this is another one I just was wondering, because there are so many characters that we meet. And I actually went on Goodreads today. I hadn't really looked through Goodreads for this character. I just wanted to see, and people have varying reactions to this. But some people have said, well, there's so many characters. I found it hard to keep them straight. I actually didn't. But I read it. I will say I read it slower than I read most books. I really had to really absorb it. But there are many characters, and it's very multifaceted in that way, looking at the lives of women in Russia. So is there a voice from your cast of characters that you assembled that resonates most strongly with you, has stayed with you? Or do you have a favorite character from the novel? And again, I
I,
want people to be asking questions for the end here.
I absolutely have a favorite character in the novel. There's a character, each chapter is a different, as you said, like the structure of the book is linear. It's a year in the life of this community, and each chapter is a different month. And the December chapter is about this 20-year-old dancer, a university student who joins a dance troupe. I love her. I loved writing that chapter. I feel very tender toward her. I feel like I want to take care of her. Like she's just so young and yet coming into her adulthood in this very consequential and challenging way. And I don't think I felt very tender toward myself or my friends when I was a 20-year-old, but when through this character, I feel more tender and loving than I ever did in real life. She reminds me of such beautiful things.
Yeah, that was definitely a good chapter. Okay, I'm going to ask one. We have just one question so far. We have a lot of people on here, but not many questions. So, oh, wait a minute. Oh, just got another question. Okay. So this one's actually gotten 4 votes. It's from Jill Dolan from Princeton University. Maybe it's such a great question that nobody else can think of something. You know, don't be, just get in there and ask whatever questions you want to know. So Jill Dolan asks, and it had 4 votes, I was fascinated by your description of and engagement with people of various ethnic backgrounds and economic diversity in this remote location. Can you talk about how you research what seemed a very nuanced and moving description of their lives?
That means so much to me. I'm really grateful that Jill responded to the book that way, because that is one of my biggest dreams for writing, is that it reflects the like the complexity of the world in which we live. And it's certainly why I love to read. Researching this book was really a challenging and illuminating process for me. I spent about a year and a half in Kamchatka over 2 different trips. I spent about a year there, and from 2011 to 2012, and then left and started working on the manuscript in the US, and then came back in 2015. And in that first year, I spent about 6 months in the capital city where the book begins. It's called Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, and it's about 99% ethnic Russian. And it's where half the population of Kamchatka lives. It's like a very concentrated center of power on the peninsula. And then I spent about half a year traveling around the peninsula and going to central Kamchatka and northern Kamchatka, going to a lot of smaller villages. I had the incredible luck of getting to follow a 1,000-kilometer dog sled race that took a month. So I went with the dog sled race, and I was not on dog sled. I was like on a snowmobile, and got to meet so many different folks who were involved with the race, who were, cheering on the race. That was an incredible experience, and it took me to places that a lot of folks who are born and raised in Kamchatka have never been, because there's so little infrastructure outside the city. When I came back to Kamchatka in 2015, I spent a substantial amount of time, a season pretty much, living in and around Esso, which is, I would say, besides the capital city, the other principal place that the book is set. Mm-hmm. And I spent a lot of time with a group of reindeer herders who were generous enough to take me into their sort of everyday lives. So reindeer husbandry is a really long-standing way of life on Kamchatka, and I got to live with and develop relationships with a group of reindeer herders that spend all their time, with a herd of, I think, about 4,000 reindeer, like traveling around central Kamchatka. That was unbelievably generous and extraordinary. It was a way to see the land, certainly, in ways that I don't think I ever would have been able to otherwise. And it was also a way to be welcomed into people's families and relationships and working life in a day-to-day way that I don't know how I could have ever had that experience otherwise. So I couldn't believe the generosity with which people welcomed me into their day-to-day lives. And there are so many ways of being on Kamchatka that I wish there were so many things I wanted to see that I wasn't able to see, and that I still dream of seeing. I'm really interested
Wow.
in what it's like to be. There's still a fishing and the Navy are big industries on Kamchatka, and that was a way of life I was not able to see that I remain very, very, very interested in.
Okay, another top question is the person wants to know that they say that to me there is an atmosphere of not just mystery, but also myth in the book.
Mm.
And do you recognize it as a description, and was that important to you? So an atmosphere of not just mystery, but
I think that's fascinating. I love that. I don't think I have thought of it in terms of myth, but I think I do think of the book often as, or as I was writing it, thinking about it as an exercise in storytelling. That there's a repetition in people saying to each other, "I'm going to tell you this story," or we tell each other stories in order to cope, or this story is crucial, or this story that we're telling is actually hurting each other. Like there's a lot of stereotyping and assumptions that go on that have to do with the sort of stories we tell about who perpetrators are or who victims are. And because I was going to say because I'm a fiction writer, but maybe just because I'm a human being who, as we all do, like really love to hear and tell stories, the way that our own personal myth-making functions and the way that we tell stories to each other and shape our beliefs around those stories, or comfort ourselves with those stories, or scare each other with those stories, that is fascinating to me. And it's something that I really wanted to sit with in this book that travels around through so many different characters and has so many different perspectives and gives me the opportunity to explore all these different women and girls' experiences of the stories that they're telling themselves or the stories that they're telling other people. So it's a kind of individual myth making, I guess, for the characters.
Yeah. And it certainly does start with a bit of a myth of a story at the start of the novel, if you read that. We have several people wanting to know who is your favorite Russian authors and how have they influenced you?
I really love Chekhov, and I really love Tolstoy.
Okay.
And I betray my Russian college professors when I say I have not historically been a big fan of Dostoevsky, but I know it's awful. It's
Dostoevsky, my
awful.
man.
Of
Okay.
course, I know. I really have to get my head straight. It's hard. Chekhov is someone who, when I read his work, I think I want to write stories like this. To me, his how efficient his work is, how moving his work is, how human the scale of his work is. It feels so intimate. That is deeply inspiring. Tolstoy sort of knocks me over and blows me away in ways that when I read, I just think, like, how has anyone accomplished what he has accomplished here? I don't understand. Yeah. It's hard for me to sort of make a direct connection in terms of literary inspiration. It's more like just what an incredible thing it is to be alive and get to read this master's work. But when I think about most actively who my influences are, or what writers I want to sort of be on the shelf decide, or the writers that I'm studying for craft, it's almost always American and Canadian authors, folks who are we got our American Canadian representation on this call, but folks who are writing in English and not in translation. I find I usually am looking at on a sentence level, and when I'm reading in translation, I'm often reading more for content than like sort of sentence work at this moment in my reading life.
Yeah. Okay. So, you know,
I also wanted to say, just to get us out of the Russian Golden Age, I just realized I'm naming I really, really, really love Lyudmila Petrushevskaya, who's, speaking of like myth making and telling scary stories, is a contemporary Russian author who is fabulous, who has great work in translation and who writes very scary, very thrilling stories. Sorry, Janie, to interrupt you. I just was...
No, that's okay. That's great. I was going to actually ask you, is there a contemporary Russian that you read, you know, that inspires you, a contemporary Russian novelist? So we have two different people who kind of have the same question that both got a lot of upvotes. Do you have a specific project in mind of what you'll work on next, a little bit about your next project? And I guess I was surprised when you were answering the previous question about one of the previous questions, that your first trip there was 2011. So this Disappearing Earth was like, what, 8-9 years in the making? So I don't want to wait another 8 or 9 years for your next book. So I hope that this is not going to be the case.
It was 10 years in the making, because I started proposing the project in 2009. I got a grant to go there in 2011, so I started like applying for the grant in 2009, and then the book came out in 2019. I know it's long stuff. I'm not the fastest in terms of cranking out new books. And right now, I have to say, so I am working on a next project that explores really similar themes of violence and gender and community, that thankfully is set a little closer to home. So hopefully will not take as long to research or be as difficult to get to as Kamchatka was. There were many hurdles in this project, but the biggest hurdle was getting to Kamchatka.
Right.
Took a lot of time each time. That being said, the project I'm most actively working on right now is I'm in my 3rd trimester of pregnancy. So I'm like expecting very, very soon. And I find that takes up a lot of time and effort, much more than I anticipated. This is my first time.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But it's a very absorbing project, I find.
Yes. Well, hopefully you'll still have some time to write once baby arrives, in between naps and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yes, you better, because I think you have a lot of fans out here waiting for your next work. So the next question has, do you have siblings? The relationship between the sisters and a lot of the other familial ties throughout the book feels very well realized. Does the theme of the us and them you referred to earlier apply to how you explore family dynamics? Asked by Jacob Hofer. Jacob, that's a great question. So do you have siblings, and how does that, if you do or don't, how does that play out in these familial ties and the us and them theme?
That's so thoughtful. Yeah, I have an older brother, and that relationship is certainly one that it's very different from the girls in the book, who I'm really like sitting, for example, in the older sister's point of view, whereas I was the younger sister growing up. And they're closer in age, and their bond is a little bit different or quite a bit different from my sibling relationship. But the sibling relationship, family relationships in general, and the sibling relationship in particular, is to me one of the most moving and fascinating relationships that there is. It's really very beautiful to me, that relationship, and one that I wanted to an aspect of the sisters in this book that I find most moving to me in the writing and the revising was the play between them being so frustrated with each other and them kind of like not being able to stand each other sometimes, and also really viscerally and explicitly protecting each other and taking care of each other and saying like, we're in this together, we are here for each other, and you are primary for me in my young life, even though sometimes I wish you would get away from me. To me, that is a very compelling dynamic to explore.
Yes. Okay, so we have three more. We have 3 more questions in the queue, which we're going to ask these 3 questions, and then we got 3 more. But so no more new ones. We're going to just get through these ones because they're all good. So this one is trying to decide. I don't think this one gives away. No. So in the penultimate chapter, I'm just trying to absorb it. 2 characters are talking about a film and disagreeing on the meaning of the ending, with one saying, the end of it is a fantasy like a dream sequence. Don't you agree? Is it overreading to relate this sentence to the book itself?
I'm so glad you asked that. I've never been asked that, and it was something I put in the book as a sort of inside joke to myself. Inside joke is a funny thing to say, but it was something that I thought, oh, this could be like an interesting way to play with anyone who ever reads it, and that was exciting to me. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to apply that to the ending of the book. That being said, I will say in my own interpretation, I do not apply that to the ending of the book. That's not how I feel about the ending of the book. However, I think it is not for me to decide how you feel about it or what you take from it. So I think that is a possible interpretation, although it is not my interpretation. But I put it in there as a possible interpretation. Is that too silly to say? But I did. There are things in there that are like, that were fun for me to put in that I wouldn't know if anyone ever noticed. So it makes me so happy that you bring that up.
I actually hadn't noticed that. So that's a really interesting one. So what would you say, this is from Nikki Anderson. What would you say was the more challenging part of working on this novel? You've clearly gone above and beyond research, which is its own challenge. Was there anything you came across in your process that really surprised you? What was the most challenging aspect?
The most challenging aspect, quite literally, the most challenging aspect was getting to Kamchatka. That took a lot of money and time. It took about 2 years to get there the first time and 3 years to save up the money to get there the second time. And there was not another part of the novel that required like 3 years and quitting my job to do. So that was logistically the biggest challenge. That being said, there were a million things that were incredibly challenging about working on the project that pushed me beyond my capacity, that I wasn't sure, and I'm not sure if I succeeded at by any means. And the biggest craft challenge, and something that I worked on the whole way through, and that now talk about like is up to every reader's interpretation, was sustaining momentum and pacing and a sense of being pulled through the text in a structure that is broken up into many different pieces. I love to read for the feeling of being pulled forward. I love to feel like I'm being pulled through the text, and that, I can't stop turning pages. I just am so captivated by what, I put the book down and I think about what's going to happen next. That is something I want my work to accomplish. I dream of my work accomplishing. But even beyond or putting aside skill, just the structure that I chose for this book, it dismantles that feeling in many ways, because it's start and stop over and over again, sort of stop and go. And that was hugely challenging and a real education to work on.
Okay. And we have one last question, and then we're going to close this down because we're getting up on our hour. And so Alyssa Capiani, and then there's a comment on this one along with that from Louise. So one of the things that Alyssa loved most about your book is how it functions as a novel in story, as well as being self-contained stories that stand on their own to present the inner lives of the characters. Could you please talk a bit about your process in writing the chapters to meet both the needs of the novel as a whole, as well as the needs of the stories that stand on? It's about your choice of title. Could you elaborate? So
Yeah. Well, okay, so I'll say the title first. I chose the title because it relates to literally allude to a story that Alyona tells Sophia in the first chapter, a story about a tsunami that in her telling washed away this chunk of Kamchatka, that there was literally this piece of earth that disappeared. And she tells the story in the first chapter. It sort of frames the whole book. And I wanted that to stick with anyone who read the book, because the girls, after telling the story and playing with this fear, then are swept away by something that they didn't anticipate and couldn't control. And so the pretend fear of the myth becomes very real to them. And I wanted to keep that sort of feeling of like, at any moment, something out of our control can knock us off our feet. And what do we do then? And sort of extend it thematically to all the characters who are all in some ways grappling with loss or with the threat of loss, and who are building their lives, as we all build our lives, on this sort of unsteady ground where you don't know what'll change next. I anticipated that the title would change in the publication process, that someone would come up with a really like kind of savvy, snappy, like Girls Gone kind of title. That didn't end up happening. So Disappearing Earth, it has always been and remains, which is lovely. I'm really grateful for the question about the novel and stories structure. That's how I think of the book myself, as a novel and stories. That it is one story told in this episodic way, in which each episode the characters have their own very pressing concerns and needs and arcs, but which all ideally fit into this larger tale. That construction was really rewarding and really challenging. I started the project thinking of it as what I called to myself like years ago, a thematically linked short story collection. So that every single character, every single chapter was a standalone short story, and that they were all linked by the theme of loss. They were all women and girls in this community who had lost something. So it had the same order of chapters. So the girls are lost. That, for example, at the end, we come to their mother as a character who's lost the girls. We have someone who like loses a dog, loses their temper, loses a friend. Everyone is losing something. And that the link, but that still we have the kidnapping of the girls framing the book, but that the only explicit link between the chapters is that sort of thematic link of everyone grappling with their own losses. When I read the first draft of the manuscript, I realized that the girls' story was much more interesting to me than, and that the more I brought it out, and the more I brought out the connections, the actual plot and narrative connections between characters, the more compelled I was by this world, and that it actually didn't conflict with or hurt the thematic connections between the stories at all. It enhanced them to ramp up narrative connections or actual sort of explicit character connections, brought out all the qualities that I had been searching for in the past. And so then the process of revision became trying to build up that sort of like, I think I thought of it often as like a spinal column with ribs. I was trying to strengthen that spine of the central story of the girls over and over and over again. That was really joyful and satisfying. And where it ended up was eventually I thought, I'm just going to call this a novel. It's clearly not a short story collection anymore. I don't know if novel and stories is something that people put on the front cover of books. And I'm dreaming of this book having a cover one day. So I'm just going to call it a novel. and that's why that was the final step of the revision for me. But it was really fun. It was really fun to work on and revise.
That's great. Well, Julie, this has just been such a great conversation, so wide-ranging, and so great to get so much insight into this wonderful book that, as it's gone into paperback printing, again, you can order that right there. It says "Order the Disappearing Earth" right there on your screen from Labyrinth Books. Call them up, get your discount, get it shipped for free. It's out there in paperback now. It's going to be in 23 languages if you want to read it in some other language. How that even works, getting that in that many languages so quickly, that's just wonderful. And we are looking forward to all of your next projects, a baby and book. And we do hope that you'll be able to make an appearance in Princeton in person at some point with the next book, or maybe for some other moment in time, because it would be delightful to host you. And so thank you again. And I think that's going to conclude this episode of Labyrinth in the Library live streaming. And we will see everybody soon for our next programs, which, well, I probably should have up here and I somehow don't. But okay, so if you go to Crowdcast or Princeton PL on Crowdcast, we don't just do actually author events in the library one. Last week we had a tour of the Lego studio of a Lego artist. This week we're going to be doing a workshop on how to do English paper piecing, but we are also doing some author events over at our page along with Labyrinth. So follow both the library and Labyrinth here on Crowdcast to find out what's coming up next. And Julia, have a great evening. Thank you for tuning in and talking to us for this last hour. It is so appreciated.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. Thank you, Janie, and thank you, people. I see that you are there, even if we're not seeing each other's faces. Thank you for this.
Okay, great. Good luck, everybody. Bye-bye.